This program is sponsored by the Holland Township Free Public Library, and we are really honored to have John Zinn with us tonight. John is an independent historian and is chairman of the board of New Jersey Historical Society. He is also the author of 5 books, including 3 about the Brooklyn Dodgers, as well as numerous essays and articles. His biography of Charles Ebbets was awarded the 2019 Ron Gabriel Award for the best research on the Brooklyn Dodgers. He is also a longtime member of the Society of American Baseball Researchers. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, to the library for sponsoring this program. Thanks to all of you for being wherever you are, but for tuning in. The topic of my talk tonight is History, Tragedy, and Comedy, the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field. And most of you, I'm sure, have figured out that the history, tragedy, and comedy comes from the plays of William Shakespeare. It's also the name of a chapter in a book that my son Paul and I did about Ebbets Field, a chapter that focuses on the most memorable moments, most memorable games that the Brooklyn Dodgers played at that historic ballpark. And I want to share some of those with you tonight. Since this is we're talking about baseball, any baseball game involves ground rules, and baseball also always involves trivia questions. The ground rule for tonight is that I am going to focus on games the Dodgers played at Ebbets Field. That means that the worst moment in Brooklyn Dodger history, the 1951 National League playoff, and the best moment in Brooklyn Dodger history, the 7th game of the 1955 World Series, are not going to be part of the agenda tonight. And I do have a trivia question for you, and if you've seen it ahead of time, probably a number of you have figured it out already. What you see on the screen now is a drawing done by a man by the name of Gene Mack. During the 1950s, he did a series of these drawings on the ballparks of the day that were published in the Sporting News. And they really capture the spirit of the park. This one of Ebbets Field captures some of the moments that I'm going to talk about tonight. Before I get into specific games, though, I need to give you a little bit of background and context. This is a picture of Ebbets Field in its prime. This is, those of us who remember Ebbets Field, this is what we remember. The small, intimate ballpark packed with fans in the heat of a pennant race against the Giants or the Cardinals. And I think this picture captures the spirit of Ebbets Field. It also proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Walter O'Malley was right when he said there wasn't enough parking at Ebbets Field. Because if you look in the lower right-hand corner and see how those cars are literally shoehorned like sardines into that parking lot, can you imagine what it would have been like if you were in the back of the lot? You probably had to wait almost as long as the game itself took to get out afterwards. Where does the name Ebbets Field come from? Well, it comes from this man, Charles Ebbets. When the Brooklyn Dodgers played their first game in May of 1883, Charles Ebbets was there as a game day employee, probably taking tickets and selling scorecards. He worked for the Dodgers from that day literally into his death in April of 1925, a baseball career of over 40 years. For the last 27 of those years, beginning in 1898, Ebbets was the president and primary stockholder of the Dodgers. So he was really a baseball lifer. Ebbets made a lot of important contributions to baseball and to professional sports in general, but he's best remembered today for building Ebbets Field. What gets lost sometime, though, is that Charles Ebbets was able to do twice what Walter O'Malley couldn't do once. He built a new ballpark in Brooklyn. The first ballpark that Ebbets built is this ballpark, Washington Park. Ebbets became president of the Dodgers in early January of 1898. Construction on Washington Park began on March 15th of that same year. And the park was ready for the home opener of the Dodgers on May 1st, 1898. 45 days later, it took 45 days to build Washington Park. Was Ebbets some kind of a magician? No, it's because this ballpark, like all the ballparks of the day, were wooden ballparks. Wooden ballparks had one major advantage. They could be built quickly. They had two major disadvantages. They were very flammable, so many of them burned down, although Washington Park never did. And the other thing is that they had very limited capacity. You see in this picture, there's only one deck. You can only build them so large. Now, this is a time when baseball owners are almost entirely dependent upon ticket sales for revenue. So it's really a problem for them. It really limits their income. Fortunately, early in the 20th century, we see the introduction of reinforced concrete. And the combination of reinforced concrete, brick, and steel enables the building of a new generation of ballparks. Ballparks that I think it's safe to say are the most beloved ballparks in baseball history. This starts in 1909 with the opening of Shibe Park in Philadelphia, that later was known as Connie Mack Stadium, and then Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. The period runs through 1923 with the opening of the first Yankee Stadium. Yankee Stadium was not part of this era of ballparks. Yankee Stadium is the first ballpark to be called a stadium. These ballparks were so beloved that, in fact, two of them continue today. Fenway Park in Boston, that opened in 1912, and Wrigley Field in Chicago, which opened a few years later. And they are on every fan's bucket list of ballparks that you have to see. Now, Ebbett's turn comes not long after 1909. The building of Ebbets Field was a major project. It's a program in itself. First thing Ebbets had to do was acquire the land. He had to do that in great secrecy because he didn't have a lot of money to work with. And if it was known what he was trying to do, then the prices would have been ratcheted up far beyond his ability to pay them. Finally, in early January of 1912, he's assembled the plots of land and he's now ready to announce his new ballpark. So he calls a gala dinner in Brooklyn, invites all the Brooklyn sports writers as well as the national media for what he says is going to be a surprise announcement. Well, most people had figured out what this topic was, that it was going to be a new ballpark. They were, however, quite surprised at the location. And there are really two reasons for that. This is the first. This is the area around where Ebbets Field was built. It was known uneuphemistically as Pigtown because of all the pigs that feasted on the garbage that was strewn throughout the neighborhood in great profusion. But even worse than the area was the site of the ballpark itself. Ebbets was probably the only one who could envision it as a ball field. It was nowhere near flat. One side was 16 feet higher than the other side. To make matters worse, in the middle was a large hole that the sports writers called either a junior Grand Canyon or the subway to China. It was so deep that it was a house built in it. And supposedly, if you walked through the area at night, even if the house was fully lit, you couldn't see it. That's how deep the hole was. Ebbets at that dinner where he makes the announcement, he says that he expects to have the ballpark ready by opening day of 1912. Well, he was half right. He had it ready by opening day, but it was opening day of 1913. It took him 15 months to build the ballpark, and he almost bankrupted himself and the Dodgers in the process. The ballpark that Ebbets built is not the ballpark we remember. It's not the ballpark that I showed you in the earlier slide. This is the ballpark that Ebbets built. It always had the short right field fence, but if you look at center field and left field, it's far deeper, far more extensive than the ballpark we remember. Center field originally was some 500 feet away from home plate. This is the classic pattern of dead ball era ballparks. It stayed this way until the 1930 season. During the 1930 season, the Dodgers were in the midst of the pennant race for most of the season. And on at least a dozen occasions, they had to turn away record numbers of people who wanted to come in, but they just didn't have, who wanted to pay to come in, and they didn't have space for them. So in the winter of 1931, they finally moved to expand the seating capacity. What they wanted to do was there was a street running behind that left field fence. What they wanted to do was to move the street back onto land that the Dodgers owned and then build out and up. But for some reason, they weren't able to do that. And so what happened instead was they had to build up and in. And as a result, we have the intimate ballpark that we had until it was demolished. Now, the building of the expansion is a story worthy of Dickens, because they built it because they didn't have enough capacity for fans. And no sooner had they built it than they didn't need it, because the Dodgers went downhill and the Depression took over and they no longer needed the capacity. So with that as background, let's talk about some of the memorable moments at Ebbets Field, beginning with a couple of moments of comedy. And the first one begins with this man. This is Casey Stengel, who we remember today as the Hall of Fame manager of the great New York Yankee teams of the 1950s. Stengel, however, was a major league player in his own right, an above average player. And this picture captures him about 1916, standing at Ebbets Field in front of that famous right field fence. You can see there's no scoreboard on top of it. On the last weekend of the regular season in 1916, Stengel will hit an unlikely home run off of Hall of Famer Grover Cleveland Alexander, one of the best pitchers in the game, to propel the Dodgers to the 1916 pennant and into the World Series. But after that, he and Ebbets have a falling out, not surprisingly, over Stengel's salary. And after 2 more years, Ebbets has had all of Stengel that he can handle. So he trades Stengel to the Pittsburgh Pirates. In May of 1919, Stengel and the Pirates come for their first visit to Ebbets Field. Stengel's playing right field. He doesn't get up to bat in the first inning. He goes out and plays right field in the bottom of the first. And then when the side is retired, he goes into the Dodger bullpen along the right field line to visit with some of his old friends. Then he goes into the Pirates dugout, gets his bat, comes up to the plate. And when he's announced, the fans give him a big ovation. Stengel was always very popular with the fans. And in response, he doffs his cap and a bird flies out from underneath his hat. This is a true story. What had happened was that when Stengel was in the Dodger bullpen, the players gave him a bird who couldn't fly, and they suspected his wings had been injured. And they asked him to take him into one of the trainers. Stengel put him under his hat and completely forgot that he was there. True story. And it kind of symbolizes the daffiness boys that the Dodgers come to be known for in the 1920s than the 1930s. Even more prominent, though, among the daffiness boys is this man. This is Babe Herman. And we remember Babe Herman almost exclusively for all the crazy things he did on the baseball field. But Herman was a very good Major League Baseball hitter. He had a .326 lifetime batting average, no small achievement. But again, he's remembered for being crazy, for being daffy. And you can imagine the media had a lot of fun writing stories about his antics, to the point that one day before a game, Herman and a sports writer are standing in the Dodgers dugout in Ebbets Field. And Herman starts saying to the writer, you know, it's really embarrassing you saying all these things about how crazy I am. It's making my family feel bad. It's really not good for me. And the writer starts to feel sorry for Herman. And he says, Babe, I'm sorry. I won't write anything else like that about you again. And Herman says, thank you. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a cigar and puts it in his mouth. Now, the umpire, in a last gesture, the writer rather, in a final gesture of reconciliation, offers to light the cigar, to which Herman responds, no need, it's already lit. The sports writer says the deal is off. Anybody who walks around with a lit cigar in his pocket is definitely crazy. Now, the epic story about Herman takes place in 1926, a game that the Dodgers are playing against the Boston Braves. It's the bottom of the 7th inning. The score is tied 1-1. Bases are loaded, 1 out, and Herman is up at the plate. Herman hits a vicious line drive into the cavernous outfield in Ebbets Field. The runner on third scores easily. The runner on second decides there's only 1 out. He'll play it careful, so he'll stop at third base. The runner at first base thinks this is the time to be aggressive, so he runs to third base. Herman, recognizing a triple when he sees one, puts his head down and keeps running to third base. So the net result is you have 3 men on third base at the same time. Abner Doubleday, when he invented baseball, frowned on the idea of any more than 1 man on a base at a time. As a result is 2 of them are out, it's a double play, and the side is retired. Now, what gets lost in this story is that Herman, the runner, had scored. And in fact, that proves to be the winning run in the game. So Herman drove in the winning run in a game where he earned immortality for one of the craziest moments in baseball history. It leads to another story. Years later, a cab driver is driving around Brooklyn on a summer night, and he sees a man sitting out on his front stoop listening to the Dodgers game on the radio. So he rolls down the window and says, "How are the Dodgers doing?" And the man says, "Great, they've got 3 men on base." To which the cab driver responds, "Which base?" So that's kind of where the Dodgers were going. Now, so those are 2 kind of comic moments. Let's go to an historic moment. This is in 1938. This is the first night game ever played at Ebbets Field, and it would have been historic in Brooklyn baseball history. However, it becomes even more historic in overall baseball history because of this man. This is Johnny Vandermeer from Prospect Park, New Jersey. Vandermeer on that night is about to go where no pitcher has ever been before or since. In his last start, Vandermeer had pitched a no-hitter. In this game, he will pitch his 2nd consecutive no-hitter, a record that has never been broken. And it's safe to say, the way baseball is played today, it will never be broken. Now, if you're a baseball purist, which I tend to be, from a pitching standpoint, Vandermeer's game was no work of art. He walked 8 batters in the course of the game, including walking the bases loaded in the 9th inning. Fortunately, he had a 6-run lead, so he was able to relax and get out of it without any trouble and preserving his no-hitter and baseball immortality. Now, 1938 kind of marks a period, the end of a period where the Dodgers have been about as unsuccessful as you can be as a baseball team. They're not very good on the field. They don't draw fans for that reason. It's the Depression, which cuts back on their attendance even more. The owners of the club, which are the estates of Charles Ebbets and his partners, are in litigation against each other. So the club is really run by the Brooklyn Trust Company, the team's bank. Now, they don't own any stock of the Dodgers, but they've loaned them so much money that they're pretty much the ones who are running the club. And they're looking for new front office leadership. They go to Branch Rickey, who has already earned a name for himself running the St. Louis Cardinals. Rickey declines the offer, but he suggests you may want to consider Larry Mcphail, somebody who used to work for me. Now, Mcphail was a great baseball mind, but there were problems that accompanied that great baseball mind. Someone described Mcphail as saying that sober, he was brilliant. With 1 drink, he was a genius. With 2 drinks, there were problems. And he seldom had less than 2 drinks. So you have this brilliant baseball mind, erratic and as short-tempered as they come. Now, that quotation about Mcphail comes from Leo DeRocher, who happened to be Mcphail's manager. And DeRocher was no blushing violet personality in his own right. So you've got 2 Hall of Fame caliber people running the Dodgers, but also is about hot-tempered and erratic as they come. But they quickly rebuild the Dodgers. The Dodgers become a successful team, competitive team. And that leads to some of the legendary fans that we remember about Ebbets Field, beginning with this woman, Hilda Chester. Somebody who sat next to Hilda Chester at games told me that at a moment's notice, she could go from polite social conversation to language that would make a sailor blush. A sports writer wrote that her voice sounded like the buzzer going off at Madison Square Garden. And he was referring, of course, to the old garden at 8th Avenue and 51st Street. And if you ever heard that buzzer going off, you know what he's talking about. In the picture is what was referred to as Hilda's cowbell, but it looks more like a school bell. The origin of the school bell is that Hilda used to go to the game and scream her lungs out from the first pitch to the last pitch. But then she suffered a heart attack. And her doctor said that, Hilda, if you're going to recover, you need to stop yelling so much at the Dodger games. Of course, she didn't take that literally, but she did make one modification. She started bringing a frying pan and a ladle, which she banged incessantly. Now, not only did it distract the other team, it distracted the Dodgers equally as much. Now, they liked Hilda, but they brought her this cowbell. so that it would at least tone it down a little bit. So you have Hilda, who's cheering the Dodgers on, and players appreciate fan support. But of course, fans don't really have anything to do with the game, or do they? There's another famous story that involves Mcphail and DeRocher, who I've already mentioned, and a Dodger player by the name of Pete Rieser. Rieser was a great player for the Dodgers in the early 1940s. DeRocher compared him very favorably to Willie Mays. He could run, throw, hit with power, could have been one of baseball's greatest players. Unfortunately, he had an affinity for running into outfield walls, which not only shortened his career, it certainly hampered his playing ability. After this talk is over, if you start watching the Mets or the Yankees on TV, and you note the warning track along the outfield, right, the outfield fence, they should call those Rieser tracks, because that's how they were introduced, because Rieser ran into so many outfield fences. Now, the game in question, it's a close game, but the Dodgers have the lead late in the game. But the Dodgers starting pitcher is in trouble. He manages to get out of the trouble with still holding on to the lead. The Dodgers come into the dugout. Rieser runs in from center field. He stops for a moment next to Mcphail's box along the railing. Then he goes into the Dodgers dugout and he hands DeRocher a note. DeRocher opens the note and it says, "Your starting pitcher doesn't have it anymore. Better get relief pitcher Hugh Casey in there." DeRocher is livid. He can barely control himself. What Mcphail knows better than to try to interfere with my management of a game. But DeRocher has a problem. That's exactly what he was going to do. So he does it, keeps control of himself. Casey puts the side out in the top of the ninth inning. The Dodgers win the game. But when the Dodgers get into their clubhouse, DeRocher goes ballistic. He starts screaming at Rieser, "Don't you ever do that again." Rieser says, "Do what again?" DeRocher says, "Don't you ever carry a note to me from Larry Mcphail." Rieser looks at him and says, "What are you talking about? That note wasn't from Larry Mcphail. It was from Hilda Chester." So you see that the fans did indeed get involved in the games at Ebbets Field. 1941, DeRocher and Mcphail's achievements, they succeed in turning the Dodgers around to the point that the Dodgers win the 1941 National League pennant. They're in the World Series for the first time in 21 years. Major factors in their success were played by these two men, Hugh Casey, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, a relief pitcher, and their all-star catcher, Mickey Owen. The fourth game of the World Series is played at Ebbets Field. The Yankees have a 2-1 lead. So if they win this game, they're going to take command of the series. But the good news is that the Dodgers have the lead. In fact, it's the top of the ninth inning. Casey is on in relief. The Dodgers lead by 1 run, 4-3. Casey gets the first 2 outs without any difficulty. Tommy Henrich is now up for the Yankees. He's got 2 strikes. The Yankees are down to their last strike. Casey pitches. Henrich swings and misses. Strike 3. The ball game is over. The Dodgers have won. They've tied the series at 2 games apiece. But wait a minute. What's that dot, that white dot at the bottom of the screen? That's the baseball. Owen has not caught the 3rd strike. The earliest written rules of baseball date back to 1845, the Knickerbocker rules, and they specify 2 things that continue today. And one of them is that the catcher has to catch the 3rd strike. So Henrich reaches first base. This shouldn't have been such a big deal. There's still 2 outs. Henrich is a long way from scoring. But the Dodgers on the field and in the dugout are shell-shocked. DeRocher doesn't know what to do. What he should have done was called timeout, gone out to the mound and settled down Casey. But he doesn't do that. And Casey self-destructs. The Yankees score 4 times. They win the game 7-4 and take command of the series, win the series the next day. Like all famous moments in baseball history, all kinds of stories attach themselves. In this case, one of the most prominent stories is that Casey was a spitball pitcher. That meant that he put saliva on the baseball, which was explicitly against the rules. And supposedly, in this instance, He loaded up the pitch so much that it was uncatchable. And if you've ever seen video, and video exists, of the pitch, I mean, it's literally inches off the ground. There was no way Owen could have caught it. At best, he could have blocked it. So the Dodgers lose that World Series, and the Dodgers have another good season in 1942, but ultimately World War II takes over, and not much happens for the Dodgers until the war is over, which brings us to the post-war period. When I spoke about Johnny Vandermeer and the first night game at Ebbets Field, I talked about what was a big moment in Brooklyn baseball history and what was a big moment in Major League Baseball history. But what happened at Ebbets Field on April 15th, 1947 was a big moment in American history, because on that day, this man, Jackie Robinson, plays his first game for the Brooklyn Dodgers. It's sometimes said that Jackie Robinson was the first African-American to play Major League Baseball. That's not correct. A man by the name of Fleetwood Walker played Major League Baseball in the late 19th century. But Robinson is the first 20th century African-American to play Major League Baseball. Context is really important here. This is before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. This is before Martin Luther King Jr. started practicing civil disobedience on a large scale. The Brooklyn Dodgers, under the leadership of Branch Rickey, are leading the way here. Ken Burns, in his history of Major League Baseball, calls this baseball's finest hour. I think maybe a better way of describing it is that baseball, for many years having been part of the problem, has now decided to be part of the solution. Now, there's no question that Jackie Robinson is one of the best players ever to play Major League Baseball. Among other things, during the course of his career, he stole home 19 times. That's probably more times than the entire major leagues has stolen home in a decade, maybe even 2 decades. And if you're one of those longtime Yankee fans who thinks that Robinson was out at home plate in the first game of the 1955 World Series, you're wrong. He was safe. Now, this next picture, I think, illustrates as clearly as it can how Jackie Robinson could dominate a baseball game. Because in this picture, a game against the Philadelphia Phillies, he's in a rundown with the Phillies. Count how many Phillies are involved in this play, in this picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But that's not all. Carl Erskine, who was the Dodger pitcher in this game, told me in an interview that the Phillies left fielder had come in to back up the play. So he's not in the picture, but he's also there. So there are 6 Phillies in this picture. Now, you may think that what you see here is a picture of how it took 6 Phillies to put out Jackie Robinson. But that's not what this is a picture of. This is a picture of how Jackie Robinson outsmarted 6 Philadelphia Phillies, because Andy Semenek, the Philly catcher, is about to throw the ball into left field, and Robinson will score and escape from this rundown. Pretty dramatic moment, and I think illustrates how Jackie Robinson could dominate a baseball game. His first year in 1947 is also another year that the Dodgers win the pennant, first time since 1941. They again face the New York Yankees, and just like in 1941, the 4th game is at Ebbets Field. The Yankees lead by 2-1 again, in a position to take command of the World Series. This time, however, it doesn't look good for the Dodgers as the game goes to the bottom of the 9th inning, because this man, Bill Bevins, the Yankee pitcher, is trying to do something that no pitcher has ever done in baseball history. He's trying to pitch a no-hitter in the World Series. Now, if Johnny Vandermeer's no-hitter was no work of art from a pitching standpoint, Bevins' no-hitter is even less so. Vandermeer walked 8. Bevins walked 9 batters in the course of a World Series game. He walked so many batters that the Dodgers scored a run without the benefit of a hit. But still, in the bottom of the 9th inning, the Yankees lead 2-1. There are 2 outs. The Dodgers have a man on first base, a man by the name of Aljon Frito, who was in there as a pinch runner because of his speed. Bert Schotten, who is the Dodger manager, sends up Pete Rieser to pinch hit. Now, Pete Rieser can no longer run, but he can still hit. Short fence in right field, maybe he could hit one over the fence and win the game. But that would take an awful lot. So Schotten's not satisfied with that. Instead, he decides to take a gamble of huge proportions. He gives Gianfrido the signal to steal second. If Gianfrido is out, the game is over, Bevins has his no-hitter, and the Yankees have their commanding 3-1 lead. You happen to see the Mets game on Sunday afternoon. The Mets game ended exactly the same way. The Mets had a 2-1 lead in the bottom of the 9th inning. The Rockies had a runner on first who was a good base stealer and one of their best hitters up. And the runner tried to steal second and was thrown out, thereby taking the bat out of one of their best hitters' hands. Now that was early, a regular season game early in the season. This is in the World Series. But fortunately for Schotten, Gianfrido is safe. If he wasn't safe, Schotten would have gone down as one of the greatest GOATs in World Series history. And when I say GOATs, I don't mean the modern term of greatest of all time. I mean, criticized beyond measure. Now, however, the managerial responsibilities are turned over to Bucky Harris, the Yankee manager. He's got the tying run on second. Rieser is up, and Rieser can hit. So he does the unthinkable. He walks Rieser intentionally, thereby violating one of the cardinal unwritten rules of baseball. You never, ever put the winning run on base. You've offended the baseball gods, which is never a good idea. Schotten promptly replaces Rieser with Eddie Mixes, another fast runner. Next up for the Dodgers, Schotten sends up Cookie Lavagetto, who has stayed for the Dodgers for one more year before retiring, just for moments like this. And Lavagetto doesn't disappoint. As you can see in this picture, he hits one off the right field wall. Now, I cannot imitate Red Barber's accent, but his call on the radio goes something like this. Here comes Gianfrido with a tying run, and here comes Mixes with a winning run. And just like that, Bevins loses no-hitter, the Yankees lose the game, and the Dodgers are tied 2 games apiece in the World Series. Ironically, the very next day in the 5th game, almost the exact same thing happens. The Yankees have a 1-run lead. Lavagetto is up to pinch hit, but this time he strikes out. The World Series goes on, and as some of you may know, in the 6th game, Gianfrido makes an amazing catch off of Joe DiMaggio to keep the Dodgers alive. This is the last time that Gianfrido will ever play in Major League Baseball. The Yankees do, however, win the series in 7 games. On this period, 1946 to 1956, the Dodgers are in the World Series 6 times, and 3 times they come heartbreakingly close. One of those times was in 1950. Their rival that year were the Philadelphia Phillies. The season came down to the last day of the season, October 1st, 1950. The Phillies trail the Dodgers by a single game. The Phillies lead the Dodgers by a single game. So if the Dodgers win, then they will force a playoff. The game goes to the bottom of the 9th inning, tied at 1 run apiece. The Dodger run comes from an unlikely home run by Pee Wee Reese. Unlikely not only because Reese didn't hit many home runs, but because of where the ball landed, which you see on this slide. You see where the arrow is pointing. The ball lodged above the wall and below the screen in right center field. Now, Major League Baseball had been played at Ebbets Field for over 30 years before that, but there was no ground rule for what happened in that situation. So the umpires had to confer, and they decided to call it a home run. After that, it was a double. Game goes to the bottom of the 9th inning, tied 1 run apiece. Immediately, Robin Roberts gets into trouble. Cal Abrams singles, Pee Wee Reese singles. The Dodgers have first and second and nobody out. Duke Snider is up. He singles to center field. Richie Ashburn is the Phillies center fielder. He's not known for his throwing arm, but he throws home. And Cal Abrams is out, to use an old baseball expression, by a country mile. Again, famous baseball moment. Many stories come out about it. One of the questions always has been, how did Ashburn, who wasn't that great a thrower, throw him out so easily? One of the stories is that the Phillies had a trick play on, And the play was that Ashburn was going to sneak in behind second base, and on a prescribed count, Roberts was going to spin around and throw the ball to Ashburn, and they were going to pick Abrams off second. The problem is Roberts missed the sign, threw the ball to home plate, and when Snyder hit it to center field, Ashburn was conveniently placed to throw the ball home. Something else about this play that nobody seems to talk about very much. If you look at the catcher in this play, that's Stan Lopata, you notice that he's tagging Abrams out, but he's looking someplace else. He's looking towards third base. And the reason is Abrams is only the first out. There's still 2 more outs to get. Now, Rieser and Snyder have moved up on the throw. The Dodgers now have runners on second and third and only 1 out. And coming up are Jackie Robinson, Gil Hodges, and Carl Furillo. If I was a Dodger fan sitting in the stands at Ebbets Field, I would have been disappointed about Abrams, but I would have felt pretty good about my chances. The Phillies walk Robinson intentionally, and then they managed to retire both Hodges and Furillo without a run scoring. The game goes to the 10th inning. Dick Sisler hits a 3-run homer, and the Phillies win the game and win the pennant. Another heartbreaking example of Dodger futility in a very close game. I mentioned earlier some of the legendary fans at Ebbets Field. Well, music also played a very important part in life at Ebbets Field, symbolized especially by this group, the Dodgers Symphony Band, emphasis upon phony. Started playing there in the 1940s, and their primary objective was not so much to make music as to make noise, distract the other team, as well as they ended up distracting, I think, any fan who just wanted to watch the game. In what seems like a comical interlude today, in 1951, the local musicians union objected to the band playing during the games. So there was a brief period where the band was not allowed to play. Walter O'Malley is the owner of the Dodgers at that point, and he's not somebody we think of as being generous or having much of a sense of humor. But one night during this period, he hosts what he calls Music Appreciation Night. And so anybody who brings a musical instrument to the game gets in free. This is just some of them. Supposedly 5,000 people took advantage of it, including 5 men who pushed a piano right up to the gates of the ballpark. And I guess they thought they were safe leaving it there. The sports writer, the beat writer for the New York Times said it wasn't Music Appreciation Night, it was Music Depreciation Night. Now, I promised you a trivia question. And the trivia question is, who is the only person to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers in baseball, the New York Knicks in basketball, and the New York Rangers in hockey? And the answer is Gladys Gooding, the organist at Ebbets Field. Not only was Gladys Gooding a longtime organist at Ebbets Field, she also played the organ at Madison Square Garden. She played the organ at the Garden almost literally up until the day she died. She was very popular with the players. Carl Erskine, Dodger pitcher, told me in an interview that anytime he came into a game, she would play back home in Indiana, which is where he was from, and how much that meant to him. Now, as we know, 1951 is the year of the worst moment in Brooklyn Dodger history, Bobby Thompson's home run for the Giants. 4 years later, the Dodgers finally realized their greatest moment when not only do they win the World Series for the first and only time, but they win it from the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. But sadly, tragically, 2 years later, the Dodgers play their last game in Brooklyn. Now, the owner of the Dodgers at this point is this man, Walter O'Malley. There's an old joke told about Walter O'Malley, which is the effect that you're in a room with Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Walter O'Malley. You have a gun, but only 2 bullets. What do you do? And the answer is you shoot O'Malley twice. That's how much O'Malley was hated in Brooklyn. And trust me, the pain is still there. For years, all the blame for this was attached to O'Malley. Recently, more of it has been attached to Robert Moses. I've always wondered why some of it wasn't attached to Robert Wagner, the mayor of New York. I don't think he would have gotten away with this today. Interesting thing is that the reason that the Dodgers felt they had to move from Ebbets Field was because of the lack of parking. But yet, the two of the most popular ballparks in baseball today that I mentioned earlier, Fenway Park and Wrigley Field, have little or no parking, and yet they seem to manage just fine. But still, sadly, on September 24th, 1957, the Brooklyn Dodgers play their last game at Ebbets Field. They defeat the Pittsburgh Pirates by a score of 2-0. Game was witnessed by a crowd of 6,702 people. In the crowd was a woman who told me many years later that some of her friends wanted to go to the game with her, but they couldn't go because they had to go to a wake. She said they missed the wake because the wake was at Ebbets Field. I understand what she meant by that. It had to be sad and depressing occasion, but it couldn't have been a wake, because for it to have been a wake, somebody would have to have died. And the Brooklyn Dodgers and Ebbets Field may be gone forever, but they will never die. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wow. Let me just get everybody back up here.
Let's see if we can end the screen sharing.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, wow. And everybody, go ahead, and I'm going to try to unmute you so you can ask questions. That's terrific. Go ahead. Anybody have questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
First of all, I got something to show from 1957. I don't know if you can see it. It's the Schaefer Lucky Strike record book and guide from the last year that Brooklyn was a Brooklyn.
Wow.
And part of it's gone, but the page showing Ebbets Field is still here.
No, that's a collector's item if there ever was one.
Second thing is do you know the incident about Frenchie Story? You must know that one.
Go ahead, tell that.
You should tell that one. You said you're a better storyteller.
I don't know it, so you're gonna have to tell.
Okay. Well, he was on second base, standing there, and he was called out by the umpire. And then the manager goes out. This is during the 30s, and the manager goes out and said, "What happened? You're standing on second base." And Frenchie says, "I was tapping my foot, and he caught me between taps."
No, gee. No, that's right in line with the daffiness, boys.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing it.
My pleasure. And the last thing is, I blame the 60s on the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn. All of us who were Dodger fans of Brooklyn, Long Island, never felt we could trust an adult after that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Thank you for.
Thank you.
It was a great lecture. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I'm glad.
One thing I've often told people was, if you didn't like baseball, you had to get out of Brooklyn.
Yeah, well.
John, a trivia question. With Carl Furillo playing right field, how many batters won a suit off the Abe Stark sign? Gotcha. I don't know the answer.
You know, I believe that there were some, but not many. This what Stuart is referring to is a sign. There are actually.
It was on your last slide, actually, the sign itself.
Yeah, the last slide. There were two signs, ballpark advertising. Abe Stark was a tailor in Brooklyn.
Oh,
He went on to become a mayor or the borough president?
Borough president.
Borough president, okay, yeah.
That's what he went.
And he had a sign that hit the sign, win a free suit, okay? And it was a big sign. And at least one player hit it like 3 times in a season. And so when they redid the ballpark, he said he'd still have the sign, but not as big as that one. So then they put the sign up that was below the scoreboard. And as what Stuart's alluding to is that Carl Furillo used to play right in front of the sign, so it was impossible to hit it. Somebody said that he should have given Furillo a free suit for guarding the sign so much.
Great story.
I remember we were all in school, and this never happened before, but the Dodgers were playing in the World Series, and every teacher brought in a radio. So every single classroom was turned into the World Series.
Yeah.
They used to put it on the public address system in my high school.
Yeah, I can remember that growing up, not in Brooklyn, but I remember that growing up as well.
Am I visible?
What happened?
John, I have a question. The fans that were Brooklyn Dodger fans, where do you think they ended up? Are more of them Mets fans now, or do they follow the LA Dodgers? And secondly, the current Mets ballpark, supposedly that part of it was patterned on Ebbets Field. How close of a pattern is that?
Well, just take the second question first. The rotunda and the outside of the ballpark from home plate going down both foul lines is very much like Ebbets Field. Now, Stuart, other of you I was never fortunate enough to go to Ebbets Field, but those of you who have been there, my understanding is that the rotunda was very small. The rotunda at Citi Field is much bigger. Now, where did the fans end up? You know, I don't think the majority of them became Los Angeles Dodger fans. I've talked to people who said, you know, as far as they were concerned, you know, that was the end. They weren't going to have anything else to do with the Dodgers.
My father.
I kept following I was, you know, in my, I guess maybe 11, 12 when that happened. I lived in northern New Jersey. I followed the Dodgers from California, which was not easy to do in those days. No. But the big change was in '62 when National League Baseball, the worst 4 years of my being a baseball fan were 59 through 61, when the only thing you could do as a baseball fan in New York was root against the New York Yankees. 62 National League Baseball returns to New York. And I think a lot of Dodger fans became Met fans. One of the people that the book that my son and I did about Ebbets Field, we interviewed a number of fans, and one guy said he was a kid at the time, and he came home, and his father was crestfallen. You know, why are you so upset, Dad? Because the Dodgers are leaving Brooklyn. And his son said, well, we can root for the Giants. And father said, no, the Giants are leaving too. Son said, oh, we can root for the Yankees. Father looked at him and said, we will never root for the Yankees. That's for the benefit of my wife's cousin, Connie Mitchko, who's blessedly muted right now.
My father.
Yeah, our idea was to root for the underdog.
Well, the Dodgers, you're right. Okay, that would have been an approach too.
John, where's your book available? Is it available on Amazon?
It is available on Amazon, yeah. Hold on just 1 minute.
Are you interested in his book?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's going to bring that.
Let the record show that I did not plant that question. This is the book about Ebbets Field. Ebbets Field, Essays and Memories of Brooklyn's Historic Ballpark. It's available on Amazon. And my more recent Dodger book is my biography of Charles Ebbets.
Oh, okay.
Both of those won the Gabriel Award for Best Research.
Showed up at a holiday.
Brooklyn Dodgers.
I did get to Ebbets Field twice.
Okay.
And, it was quite something.
That's what everybody says. Well, Stuart, you can speak to that. You were there many times.
Yeah,
Tell them how you got in without paying.
Well, I was a student at Erasmus Hall High School.
Oh, wow.
And lived between Erasmus Hall and Ebbets Field. So I was like 20 minutes in each direction. And so I would leave school at the end of the day and travel up to Ebbets Field. And along about the 7th or 8th inning, they kind of opened up the gates to let people leave, which was an opportunity for me to get in for free. And I would sit there and watch the end of a lot of games, hoping for extra innings so that I could sit there longer. And then I would hang around after the game at the point where players were exiting the field, both Dodger fans and the visiting team. And I would get autographs galore from, at that point, ball players that were more than happy to sign the baseball cards that I had.
Wow.
And then my mom threw them all away.
Yeah.
You're the only one that ever happened to, Stuart.
Yeah.
Something interesting that people told me, the other way they got autographs is that they would wait for the players outside the locker room, and they would give them a self-addressed postcard. And so the player would just sign the postcard and then put it in the mail, and they got autographs that way. I'm not sure if my wife is trying to ask a question or not. There's an icon with a hand up.
Yeah, looks like
She's
it.
muted. She's muted, so I
ask her to unmute.
You.
Carol, do you have a question?
I'll ask you later, okay? I just wanted to if you could tell about your interview with Carl Erskine,
Sure.
how pleasant he was.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. We tried to interview as many, this book was done a good 5-6 years ago. So we interviewed as many living players as we could talk to. My son actually interviewed Robin Roberts, one of the last interviews he did before he died. But I had Carl Erskine, and he had sent me, in response to my request, he had told me to call a cell phone number. And so I called the number, and there was no way to leave a message. So I just hung up and I said, okay, I'll try again the next day. Now, Carol's out someplace. So I'm literally about to go outside to rake leaves, and the phone rings. Hi, this is Carl Erskine. I see you called. And he's calling me at his own expense from Indiana. He talked to me for about 45 minutes, and he says, well, I've probably taken enough of your time by now. You know, right, exactly. There's like no chance of that happening. So we talked for another 15 minutes. We finished the call, hang up. I'm looking for one of my neighbors to talk to about this. Nobody's around. The phone rings again. Hi, it's Carl Erskine. I forgot something. And what he forgot to tell me was something I mentioned. He said that Gladys Gooding, the song that she played the most at Ebbets Field was, of course, the national anthem. But the song that she played the second most was Back Home in Indiana, because she played it whenever he came into a game, whenever Gil Hodges came up to bat, and whenever Billy Herman came up to bat, all of them from Indiana. So he was the ultimate gentleman. He is still alive. I think he's 96.
Really?
Remarkable man.
And another question, John?
Yes?
You asked some of the players if they would give you an interview, and they wanted an exorbitant amount of money.
Yeah, I'm not gonna name names, but one firm guy wanted $10,000 to talk to my son for 30 minutes.
Oh my God.
Times have changed.
Wow.
That's the problem with the sports today. Everything's money.
Well, you know,
it's to be that way.
It's the extreme of the other side, you know, where some of these guys they just get pestered without it. And I don't want to say anything more about who it was, but that, you know, but we dealt with that pretty quickly. You know, that's not going to happen.
And okay, last question. Can you mention Doris Kearns Goodwin and your interview with her and her book also? Well,
Carol's referring to Doris Kearns Goodwin's, the presidential historian's memoir, Wait Until Next Year.
Wait till next year, yeah.
Wait till next year. And if you haven't read it, it's well worth reading. If you grew up in the 40s and 50s, especially if you happen to grow up in the Catholic Church, it can have some special meaning for you there. I wanted to interview her for the book because we were interviewing fans as well. I got to interview two prominent historians, Robert Caro, who is one of my literary heroes, his biographies of Lyndon Johnson and Robert Moses, that interview is one of the greatest moments of my life. But I got to interview Doris Kearns Goodwin. it happens that Carol is one of Doris Kearns Goodwin's biggest fans. So we finished the interview with Doris, and she had to get off the phone. I almost finished. She had to step off the phone for a moment. And I knew if I said to Carol, would you like to speak to Doris Kearns Goodwin? There was no way she would do it. So I called her and said, come up here. And she was standing next to me. And when Doris came back on the phone, I said, Doris, my wife is one of your biggest fans. Would you speak to her? And of course she said yes. And they had a very nice conversation. Doris's son teaches in the Concord Public Schools in Massachusetts, as does our daughter-in-law. So they had something in common to talk about.
Very nice.
Well, some memories.
Oh, yeah.
You did a great job. I must say, you're very, very thorough.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just came across that Frenchie story. It's actually in this book. That's probably where I found it.
I had not heard that story before, but that's not, that's in line with the many stories about the Dodgers.
The first game I ever went to, which was 1955, it featured a 2-run home run by Willie Mays in extra innings, a triple by Snyder, and a squeeze bunt by Jackie Robinson to tie the game in the last of the 10th.
Wow.
It was an amazing game.
Yeah, no, that's baseball at its best.
It really was.
Yeah.
I remember that game from, God, 37 years ago, 47 years ago, more than I remember than any game I've seen in the last 30 years.
More than you remember what you had for dinner, right? You never forget your first baseball game. Stuart, do you remember your first game at Ebbets Field?
Not really, no.
Okay.
But it would have been, the early 50s until the time they left.
Okay.
A question about the squeeze play. Why do you no longer see that in baseball?
Very good question. Very good question. Why do you no longer see bunts, sacrifice bunts? I mean, it's
right.
It's interesting. If you watch the video of I'll try to make this short. You watch the video of the 7th game of the 1955 World Series, the game that the Dodgers win the World Series for the first time. In the same inning, in consecutive at-bats, Duke Snyder and Roy Campanella both bunt. They both sacrifice runners over. Today, no one would ever even think about that.
Yeah, Mantle used to bunt every now and then.
But that was, I remember a Mets game a couple years ago where the situation called for a bunt by Michael Conforto, and I'm not going to try to pick on him. And the announcer said he's never been asked to bunt in his entire career. Well, something's missing here. Why can't you learn that skill?
Okay, so John, what I remember, Roy Campanella, number 39 behind the plate.
Right.
Bill Hodges, number 14, first base.
Right.
Jackie Robinson, number 42, second base. Pee Wee Reese, number 1. Billy
Reese was my favorite player.
Billy Cox, number 3.
Okay.
And Carl Ferrillo, number 17.
No, Carl Ferrillo's number 6.
Okay, maybe, right.
Maybe it's later in his career.
Might have been. And then Duke Snyder, number 4. And then they had a whole host of right fielders.
Right.
The
reason I remember
these numbers, and I didn't look it up. I just remember these numbers.
The reason I remember Ferrillo's number, Pee Wee Reese was my favorite player. And when I was in the equivalent of Little League, of course, I wanted number 1 and couldn't get it. And I got 6 instead, which was Ferrillo's number.
No, you're right. Ferrillo was 6. You're right.
Yeah.
It was the left fielders they kept changing.
Right. That's why.
Well, Andy Pafko would be one of the most prominent. Also, Gene Hermansky.
Sandy Amorose, who made that catch.
Sandy Amorose, of course, yeah.
Wow.
They watch that video of Amorose. Amorose makes the decisive catch off of Berra. It's to save the 7th game of the World Series. And they talk about how it could only have been made by a left-handed player. But if you watch that video, Amorose slows down. He was in danger of overrunning the ball.
Really?
So, that's the way I see it. So I'm not sure that that's accurate, that only a left-handed player could have caught it.
think Carl Erskine was number 17.
That could be.
Right. And Don Newcomb, number 36. How, you know, how many years? We're talking 50, 60 years ago. I remember these numbers.
Really?
It's an illness.
I remember Don Newcomb hitting. What did he hit? 359 one year. I mean, he's the best average in baseball one year.
Hit 7 home runs in one season. I mean, think about that. A pitcher hitting 7 home runs.
Right.
We had this all-star baseball game that had discs before they had computers. They had like discs, and the percentage of like number 1 was a home run, and the home run area on Newcomb's card was as big as any of the sluggers in baseball.
Right. Right.
Because proportionally he'd hit a home run once every 10 at bats or so.
Yeah.
This was great, John. We're just so grateful for you to do this. I can see how everyone is enjoying it. No one wants to let you go.
That's true. Feel young again. We really had to pester my father. My father was from Austria and had no interest in baseball whatsoever. So I had to wait till I was almost 10 to get to finally my brother and I pestered him to take us to a game. And even, hey, you had to admit that that game was unusually good, that you finally got us, you finally got to.
So I guess it depends on when your family came. The Zinn family has been here since 1849. And baseball goes back a long time. My grandfather was playing industrial league baseball 100 years ago as we speak. And that wasn't his first career, or his first year. I mean, so, you know, and you don't see that in other, you know, well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is you don't see that in other sports. Football, basketball doesn't have that kind of history.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Oh, well, it's nice trip down memory lane, John.
Good.
Really appreciate it.
I'm glad.
Appreciate Carol for chiming in too.
Great questions from your wife. Thank you.
This is wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for participating.
Thank you, John. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And if this program will, if you want to visit again, it will be on the Holland Township Free Public Library YouTube channel in probably about a week or so. So you can watch it all again if you like, if you missed something. Okay.
Well, thanks a million.
Thank you for arranging it.
Yeah.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Thanks,
Good night, everybody.